Hi everyone, Ethys here, and I know I'm a little bit late to the party on this one, but a few people have asked for my opinion on this one, and I think they're actually a little surprised at the answer I gave, so I decided it was probably worthwhile recording a video on the subject and contributing to what has already become a pretty divisive discussion. So for those of you who haven't heard, Naoki Yoshida mentioned in an interview with Gamerscape about a month ago now at E3 that the dev team has been debating internally about adding a jump potion or equivalent, presumably available via the Mog Station. This would be an item which players could pay for with real money in order to skip the story and leveling process and proceed directly to the endgame. No main scenario quest, no job quests required, although I imagine this will only be the case for a single elected job. You're straight into gearing up for raid. Obviously, this would appeal to returning players that don't want to spend weeks catching up, new players that want to be able to run endgame content with friends, and current subscribers that honestly couldn't care less about the story and the lore and just want to get straight to raiding. Now, I think it's worth examining first of all why it is that this kind of feature is being considered and why exactly people would want it. Obviously, it's to skip the leveling grind, but let's be real, leveling in Final Fantasy XIV is not and never really has been super grindy, especially not for an MMORPG. The leveling process is also designed in such a way that you gradually learn the fundamentals of your job as you go, and by the time you get to 60 now, you're ideally not completely incompetent. I know this doesn't always work and plenty of people slip through the cracks, but I don't think it's nearly as many now that dungeons are generally the best way to level up, whereas through most of 2.x you could literally just spam fates and reach max level thinking that Fire 3 spam was an acceptable way to DPS. Now with a jump potion, this would of course be 1,000 times worse unless we had something like a Stone Sky Sea trial as a requirement to qualify for any max level instances. And I believe that this is actually more or less what World of Warcraft does. So a drop in average player competence is obviously a huge problem here, but I don't think it's one that is impossible to mitigate. The other major point I see people making against the idea of a jump potion is that this is an RPG. It's a Final Fantasy game. If you don't care about story or characters or world building, you should probably play something else. And this is the camp that a lot of people seem to expect me to be in, and for pretty obvious reasons. Of course, I would never personally want to skip any part of the story, but I also believe that other people, they're perfectly entitled to play however they like, provided it doesn't have any significantly negative impact on anyone else. And furthermore, I believe that offering a jump potion to those people who don't care for the story might actually make the game better for those that do. So hear me out. During A Realm Reborn, we saw a massive number of complaints from people who didn't care about the story, that the main scenario quest was too long, there was too much dialogue, too much alleged filler, complaints that you had to defeat one primal in order to progress onto the next and the next, complaints about cutscenes during dungeons, complaints about getting cutscenes at all, basically a lot of noise from people about things that they wanted to skip. Now, when Heavensward came along, and don't get me wrong, I think the main story and all of the major side stories for Heavensward have been great so far, the dev team took these kinds of complaints to heart, and what we've seen, particularly in the story content for 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, has clearly been influenced by them. To be fair, we have had quite a few cutscenes, and they've all been really fantastic, and better than most of the cutscenes from A Realm Reborn, but all the same, every main scenario quest for every major patch of Heavensward so far has been short and to the point, with no excessive supplementary dialogue, no real tangents into lore and history and world building. Everything is much faster paced. I've really enjoyed it so far, but at the same time, I do miss some of those slower parts of the 2.x story where we were engaging with minor characters and things that weren't so directly or critically linked to our quest, but really made the world feel, at least to me, more rich and full and vibrant. From the complaints made about the primals in 2.x, we now have the Warring Triad in its own separate story, and it's a good story, but because it's separate from the main scenario quest, we're going to find that once we're done with it, it's going to be just like Coil. It's never going to be mentioned again. Whatever development the characters find there who also appear in the main scenario quest will not transplant that development over, we're going to have to pretend that it never happened. Because to the lowest common denominator of people who never bothered to do the Warring Triad questline, it didn't happen. And the developers have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And I say that without a trace of sarcasm, because that's how you gain and keep subs and have a successful, well-funded and populated game for all of us. Now, I know that there is still dedicated content for people like us that love the stories and the world of Final Fantasy XIV. We've seen the Scholasticate, more Hildebrand, the story involved with the Shadow of Mark is pretty great. There's plenty of lore between the lines there, and the Alexander story is definitely improving. We got our 3.3 post-story reflection on the Dragonsong War, which was some really nice closure for those of us who don't just want to immediately rush off to the next thing. I do not by any means think that Final Fantasy XIV's story and lore is going to shit, nor do I think that it is likely to. However, I do know for a fact that the devs are heavily influenced by the feedback we give them as a community, and although it didn't have any particularly negative impact at this time, I don't want people who give zero shits about the story to be able to influence the pace and the content of the story. I don't want the large number of people who skip the story and then get onto the official forums or the live letter Q&As and complain that there were certain parts of the story that they couldn't entirely skip to subsequently leverage the story into becoming shorter and narrower for the rest of us. This is something that I've been genuinely worried about, and for me, a jump potion completely dissolves this worry. It's the perfect solution. Don't like long, flowing, detailed dialogue? Don't like having to actually explore each of the beautiful locations in the game? Don't like having long cutscenes before and after main story dungeons? Oh, you want us to cut all of that out, huh? Well, guess what? We don't have to. You can skip it all with a jump potion. You can have the game your way, we can have it our way, no compromises. We can pad out the main scenario with some good and interesting filler, and I don't mean just empty fetch quests. More story for the people who want it, and zero story for the people who don't. That's what jump potions could realistically bring to the game, and I think that it's something which people who are firmly against the idea might be overlooking, and I would encourage them to reconsider. Speaking of overlooking, I'm sure there are some good arguments both for and against the implementation of this feature that haven't occurred to me. Perhaps you think it's pay to win for the world first races. Perhaps you think that it should be available to all subscribers and that monetizing it is a bad move. So I would of course love to hear what you think, so feel free to leave a comment below. But like I say, after having the same conversation with a bunch of different people, I thought it might be a good idea to finally toss my hat in the ring and share my opinion with the gentle and placid people of the internets. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.